Hello and welcome to Read Read. Today we're going to be talking about love, specifically Essays in Love written by Stendhal. This is a book that I kind of knew I wanted to check out because it played a really important part in Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex, where she has this section where she's almost doing a literary analysis of the different perspectives or the different ways in which men have written about women, and she cycles through sort of 5 relatively influential French authors, where she starts with one who is like the worst guy, so much so that I've like blocked his name out of my head, and then she ends with Stendhal, who she says basically wrote as sort of interestingly and wrote about women with as much focus as men write about men. And so I thought, well, I gotta check out Stendhal if de Beauvoir devoted such a substantial portion of The Second Sex to him. And so I picked up, of course, his Essays in Love, which is what was mostly referenced. And I really enjoyed the experience. There is some kind of hilarious... I would say that it was sort of just funny. It was funny reading the book. I don't really know how else to describe it. Part of what makes it so funny is how messy the book is. So it's very obviously like just a journal, and the background or the context of the book is that, as conveniently provided by the blurb, is that back in 1818, when he was in his mid-30s, Stendhal fell in love with a beautiful woman, Matilda Dembowski, and basically she rejected him, and then his way of processing or dealing with the rejection was to frantically write about all of his feelings of love. And it was really cool because, thank you, Matilda, for rejecting him, because who would have known if he would have written this book otherwise? And I was just thinking, I was like, is there a book or a catalogue of the most influential or most important rejections that have ever occurred in the history? I don't know. I'd be interested to find out what it is, and to see how Stendhal and Matilda ranks on the list. But yeah, anyway, so he goes through, and obviously writing this book informs a lot of, it's like very proto-feminist, and it informs a lot of Simone de Beauvoir, who herself was very influential. The reason that I love how messy this book is because it's essentially just sort of 60 chapters. Some of them aren't even named, and they just really feel like journal entries. But then other ones will have some convenient titles like Concerning Modesty, Concerning Jealousy, Province in the 12th Century. There's a really cool chapter on Werther and Don Juan. But yeah, that's essentially what it is, and he talks a lot about crystallization as well, which we'll get into in a moment. I really love that in the opening. I'll see if I can find it, because I think I saved the extract. Yeah, so he says, something I love about Stendhal, he's so sort of almost archetypally romantic, probably archetypally romantic, that he even admits that there are times in this book where he read it back later and he just says, I don't even know what I was talking about. And I just thought, what's so hilarious is that instead of getting rid of it or editing it, he just thought, no, well, I trust the sincerity with which I must have written it because of the sort of dude that I am, so I'm going to keep it in. And he writes more specifically, I admit that I carried my respect for the manuscript as far as to publish several pages that I no longer understood. And yeah, I think that's basically all of the setup that I wanted to talk about. We'll jump into basically already reading extracts, but the next up, Stendhal being a bit of a nerd, he says, the book that follows explains simply, rationally, and, as it were, mathematically, the various feelings which succeed each other to become, in their entirety, the passion called love. And I think you can tell that it's maybe, I'm trying to think about this, how to phrase this, but it's like, you can tell how informed by Romanticism he was, that he thinks this is mathematical, where it's more, like it's probably much more fair to say that it's an anthropological perspective, because he does constantly reference different sort of like... Okay, probably the most accurate thing to say is that it's an anecdotal exploration, but it's somewhat anthropological because he is at least talking about his experience being in French society and living in all of these different countries. So he lived in Italy as well, lived in Milan, and so on. And but it's obviously not mathematical, but I think it's probably that maybe gets into this romanticization of the arts and of the sciences and whatnot, when really it is sort of Montaigne-esque essays and personal explorations of these ideas. Alright, so this is cool. Chapter 2 is concerning the birth of love, and it's cool because we have kind of 5 different steps that go into the birth of love, and at the end he talks a little bit about crystallization, which is this term that he's coined. But the birth of love, firstly, number 1 is admiration. Then number 2 is you think, oh, how delightful it would be to kiss her, to be kissed by her, and so on. And then number 3, you have hope. Number 4, love is born. And then number 5, the first crystallization begins. If you are sure that a woman loves you, it is a pleasure to endow her with 1,000 perfections and to count your blessings with infinite satisfaction. In the end, you overrate wildly and regard her as something fallen from heaven, unknown as yet, but certain to be yours. And a little bit later down, he talks about crystallization, and he gives an anecdote of the salt mines in Salzburg, where what they would do is they would throw a bow into these abandoned, mines, and then 2 or 3 months later they would come, and the moisture had accumulated on it, and it was essentially filled with salt crystals, so it would look very fancy. I'll see if I can look it up, because in my whole reading of this I never actually looked that up to see what that looks like, but if I can find one I'll put it on the screen. And then Stendhal talks about that as being the crystallization process in our mind of love, where he says, what I have called crystallization is a mental process which draws from everything that happens new proofs of the perfection of the loved one. And Stendhal also is like, he talks about how he doesn't have any literary talent, which... reading the extracts at the end, I kind of got that vibe. But he says, probably the smarter thing to do would have been to have actually gotten a friend of mine who is an author to come up with a better word than crystallization. But alas, we've already committed to it. And I'm like, shut up, Stendhal. You know you love the word crystallization. Just admit it. And then going a little bit more deeper into crystallization, he writes, crystallization goes on throughout love almost without a break. The process is something like this. Whenever all is not well between you and your beloved, you crystallize out an imaginary solution. Only through imagination can you be sure that your beloved is perfect in any given way. After intimacy, ever-resurgent fears are lulled by more real solutions. Thus happiness never stays the same, except in its origin. Every day brings forth a new blossom. This is one of those sections where reading this book almost because of how strongly and how often Stendhal is referenced in The Second Sex, reading this book just had a whole bunch of deja vu for me, where, here's 2 extracts that Simone de Beauvoir very much leaned in, and I'm sure you can tell why. Women prefer emotion to reason. It's quite simple. Since in our dull way we never give them any business responsibility in the family, they never have occasion to use reason, so they never regard it as of any use. Indeed, they find reason a positive nuisance, since it descends upon them only to chide them for their enjoyment of yesterday, or to forbid them the enjoyment of tomorrow. If we were to hand over the administration of 2 of your estates to your wife, I wager the accounts would be better kept than by yourself. And then, well, you would of course have the right to feel sorry for yourself, you pitiable despot, since you lack even the talent to excite love. Oh man, I love Stendhal. I'm worried that the way that I'm talking about this book is coming across as me picking on Stendhal, but it's really not, because I really like him. He's got like, it's like simpin, and simpin ain't easy, as we learned from Geralt of Rivia. But I don't know. There's something I love about just the huggable teddy bear, the big milksop that is Stendhal. He leans in a little. I mean, he talks a lot about being French and like being part of society, and he says, In love, men run the risk of suffering secret torments while women lay themselves open to public jest. In the first place, they are shyer, and besides, public opinion means much more to them because to be esteemed, quote, is imperative. This is in one of those unnamed chapters. One of life's misfortunes is that one cannot remember distinctly the happiness of seeing and speaking to the beloved. Apparently, you become too emotionally upset to notice the cause of the circumstances. You are aware only of your own sensations. Perhaps it is because you cannot wear out these pleasures by deliberate recollection that they are so strongly renewed by anything which diverts from the sacred inner contemplation of your beloved and recalls her more vividly by some new relevance. There's some pretty cool stuff. There's some pretty cool extracts written here concerning infatuation. Some people, over-fervent or fervent by starts, loving on credit, if I may put it that way, will hurl themselves upon the experience instead of waiting for it to happen. Before the nature of an object can produce its proper sensation in them, they have blindly invested it from afar with imaginary charm which they conjure up inexhaustibly within themselves. As they come closer, they see the experience not as it is, but as they have made it. They take delight in their own selves in the mistaken belief that they are enjoying the experience. But sooner or later, they get tired of making the running and discover that the object of their adoration is not returning the ball. Then their infatuation is dispelled, and the slight to their self-respect makes them react unfairly against the thing they once overrated. This is in a chapter called The Introduction, chapter 25, which I guess is the introduction to people, but I just think it's hilarious having an introduction there. But for my part, I fall back as usual on the laws of physics. The nervous fluid is taken up in men by the brain and in women by the heart. That's why they are more vulnerable. Men can find consolation in having to get down to some important task in their chosen and accustomed profession. Women have nothing to console them but idle distractions. And I was like, man, am I reading Burton's The Anatomy of Melancholy again? I'm getting some great, bad science or fake science. But then again, the cool thing, like something that I want to almost recommend, again, coming from reading Burton and just a bunch of older books, is that when you see sort of science that's explicitly wrong, like Aristotle thinking that babies could move around in your body, in pregnant women's body, it becomes fine as soon as you just think, oh, I'll just think about that allegorically, not, literally. This is a cool one, and I feel like, I can't remember exactly, but I feel like Simone de Beauvoir also referenced this quite extensively. This is in the chapter concerning feminine pride. Women of spirit realize that they cannot hope to be proud in these important fields since such matters are out of their reach. They know that in their bosoms beat hearts whose emotions are stronger and loftier than their surroundings. Yet they see that even the meanest of men are accorded more respect than themselves. They perceive that they themselves can only be proud in little things, or at least in things whose importance is only measurable in terms of feelings, and which an outsider cannot judge. Tortured by the painful contrast between the paltriness of their lot and the loftiness of their spirit, women determined that their pride shall be respected for the very vehemence of its manifestation, or for the implacable tenacity with which they uphold their interdictions. Women of this sort, before intimacy, think themselves fortresses besieged by their lovers. They are irritated by the latter's advances, though these are only marks of love, and the lovers are, after all, in love. Instead of enjoying the expression of the lover's affection, women grow conceited, and when they do fall in love, however sensitive they may have been before, they have nothing left but vanity. Stendhal has an interesting hypothesis for why people back in the Middle Ages were able to create such great art, which apparently they were, and he says, in the Middle Ages, men's hearts were infused with an ever-present sense of danger, and here, if I'm not mistaken, lies the second reason for the astonishing superiority of the men of the 16th century. Originality, nowadays so rare, ridiculous, dangerous, and often affected, was then general and unvarnished. Chapter 55 is called Objections to Education for Women, which is not him objecting it, it's him responding to common objections to it. And he has one where he starts with saying that people would believe that women are responsible for the small household tasks, and he has this nice big breakdown, but then he conveniently summarizes it and says, all that this argument boils down to is that one wishes to be able to say of one's slave, he is too stupid to be wicked. And then another one of the arguments is, women would become men's rivals instead of their companions. And Stendhal responds, yes, as soon as you have abolished love by legislation, and in anticipation of this fine law, love will merely grow twice as delightful and exciting. The basis for the establishment of crystallization will grow wider, and a man will be able to enjoy his ideas to the full with the woman he loves, and all nature will take on new charms before their eyes. And since ideas always reflect something of the people's characteristics, they will know each other better and be less liable to act rashly. Love will grow less blind and result in less unhappiness. Which, hearing about that and thinking about, I didn't think about this at the time of reading it, but yes, as soon as you have abolished love by legislation, now I'm thinking about Mao's communist China and about the sort of stuff that I read in Eileen Chang's Naked Earth. With the present system for education for girls, any genius who happens to be born a woman can make no contribution to public happiness, but no sooner does chance provide a means of showing her capabilities than you will see her mastering the most difficult achievements. I love this. So the penultimate chapter of the book, the final chapter, by the way, is called Concerning Fiascos, which is already brilliant. But the second last chapter is comparisons between Werther and Don Juan, and talking about different ways of loving. And we can very much see who Stendhal believes he is. But I think he has some very, very correct or cutting criticisms for Don Juan that are really just, they show up. They're still around today, right? Don Juans are prone to long periods of barrenness and to an extremely cheerless old age. Most men, however, never reach old age. A man in love cuts a poor figure in the drawing room in the evening, because one can only exercise skill and power over women to the extent that one regards their conquest in the same way as a game of billiards. Since society is aware that lovers have one chief interest in life, however intelligent the lovers may be, they lay themselves open to jest. But when they wake in the morning, instead of being testy until something stimulating or subtle happens to soothe them, their thoughts are wholly about the loved one, and they build castles in Spain wherein dwells happiness. Love a la Werther opens the mind to all the arts, to all sweet and romantic impressions, moonlight, the beauty of the woods, and of painting. In a word, to the feeling of enjoyment of the beautiful, in whatever form it presents itself, even the humblest. It shows the way to happiness even without riches. People like this do not run the risk of becoming sated like Melan, Besenval, etc., but rather lose their wits and in excessive sensibility like Rousseau. Women gifted with minds of certain distinction, who, once their first youth is past, recognize love for what it is when they see it, usually manage to evade the Don Juans, whose conquests generally run to quantity rather than quality. To the detriment of the respect due to the sensitive, note that publicity is essential for the triumphs of the Don Juans, just as secrecy is necessary for the triumphs of a Werther. Most professional philanderers come from the wealthy homes, which is to say that by virtue of their education and their imitation of those who surround them in childhood, they are selfish and unfeeling. Genuine Don Juans even come to regard women as their enemies and to rejoice in the misfortunes of the opposite sex. Which I think it's very obvious that that's happening again. Unlike Werther, for whom realities are shaped by his desires, Don Juan's desires are imperfectly satisfied by cold reality, as in ambition, avarice, and the other passions. Instead of losing himself in the bewitching reveries of crystallization, his attitude is that of a general to the success of his tactics, and in brief, he destroys love instead of enjoying it more than others, as is commonly believed. And so after that, after that section, which again is reminding me that I need to go and read The Sorrows of Young Werther, because that's still, I've not even thought about picking that up. After that, we have the chapter concerning fiascos, and then we have a long, in this collection at least, which, oh my gosh, I just realized I completely forgot to mention, is translated by Gilbert and Suzanne Salé. After that, we have about 100-ish pages of various fragments, which these are very much like just one-liners and sometimes half a paragraph. But I thought it would be interesting to end on this one. This is the last extract that I have. And I thought it was cool thinking about how it's sort of prescient for Stendhal in light of, the kind of literary movement and the importance in Paris in the early 20th century, where he writes in extract number 151, "Just as the English way of life came into existence between 1688 and 1730, that of France will be created between 1815 and 1880. Nothing will be so beautiful, just, or happy as the moral atmosphere of France in about 1900. At present, it is none of these." Which is pretty cool. And yeah, all in all, I had an absolute hoot reading this. I don't know. I just love anyone who loves love this much, Love loves to love, and Stendhal loves to love. So I loved to read love, and I hope that you will read love as well. Thanks for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video.